MSNBC political analyst David Corn with Mother Jones and Howard Fineman of the Huffington Post. All right, Howard, I'm going to you first.
Okay.
How like Gandhi and George Washington is Clive Bundy? Explain.
Well, Gandhi had great respect for cattle as well.
Indeed.
Except that he didn't want to kill them and eat them, so there's that. Having spent a bunch of time in those parts of the United States, I always find it amusing that people like Clive and Bundy and his supporters rail against the federal government. But it's the federal government who provides enormous benefits in terms of payments for minerals, in terms of water reclamation, in terms of rural electrification, in terms of all the things that only the federal government has the ability and the power to provide. But none of that means anything to somebody like Clive and Bundy, who is under the illusion that he's truly an independent actor who doesn't need any help from anyone else in the world. That's just not the way it works. When he's shipping his cattle on interstate highways or on rails, he's doing it with the help of the entire United States. But that doesn't fit into the conservative narrative in places like the National Review.
Well, and then also there's the fact that, Gandhi never called in a militia, an armed militia, to have a potential violent showdown with the British government. You know, David Corn, you, as the person who discovered the infamous 47% video and published that in Mother Jones, do you find it at all ironic that this is a fight essentially on the right over wanting free stuff? This gentleman wants free grazing rights. He wants the federal government to give him something absolutely for free for 20-plus years.
I think there's a lot of ironies here. You know, he's looking for a free ride or free lunch, at least a free lunch for his cows. And at the same time, he's encouraging lawlessness when the Republican Party was always supposed to be the party of law and order. But what this really reminds me of, and this is why I think it's dangerous, Joy, I don't want to just make jokes here, back in the 1990s, when you had people like G. Gordon Liddy and Wayne LaPierre, who we still see these days, talking about the jackbooted thugs of the U.S. government, people at the Bureau of Alcohol and Tobacco and Firearms, and others who were really breeding disrespect, creating this sort of conspiratorial notion that the federal government had black helicopters, they're out to get you at Waco, at Ruby Ridge, and we know where that led to. It led to Oklahoma City bombing. After that, you know, the militia movement kind of tampered down, but when you give people like this, people like Clive and Bundy, who actually says he doesn't accept the authority of the federal government in any manner, shape, or form, not just over this land issue. You put on Fox News, you bring the militia guys in, you validate, you justify the worst excesses of the right wing, and it could lead to more dangerous situations.
Yeah, and to that exact point, David, Sean Hannity actually stoked the fears of the hard right on Fox News last night, suggesting to the Bundy family that federal authorities might, in fact, kill one of them in the process of settling the dispute. Take a listen.
Do you worry that, in fact, they may kill either your dad or somebody in your family?
Well, you know, this battle's been going on for my whole life almost, and if death were our main fear, we wouldn't be here today. Freedom is much greater than death.
And Howard, I have to go to you on this, because what could the possible upside be for conservatives to sign on to that kind of an idea that a violent confrontation with the federal government is preferable to following the law?
Well, first of all, I think that Sean Hannity went over the line there in playing into the fantasy of victimhood and martyrdom. That's part of the dangerous part of what's going on here. I don't think it does the Republican Party as a whole any good, for the reason David said, because you can't win an election on apocalyptic paranoia in this country, as comforting as it might be to some of the people who believe it, as much of a sense of camaraderie as it might give the militia people and the states' rights people on the edges of American society. That's exactly what it is, a fringe. And it's the need for inclusiveness, it's a need for community that the Republicans have been unable to express beyond their narrow demographics that's put them in the hole that they're in heading into the presidential election in 2016.
Yeah.
You can't be a party that reaches out to everybody if you're a party who thinks that everybody's out to get you.
No, absolutely, Howard. I think you make an excellent point. And you haven't heard a lot of the 2016 contenders actually come out and weigh in on this. One has, however, and that would be, of course, Mike Huckabee, who this past weekend in New Hampshire said this. Take a listen.
Here's what I would suggest, that there is something incredibly wrong when a government believes that some blades of grass that a cow is eating is so an egregious affront to the government of the United States that we would literally put a gun in a citizen's face and threaten to shoot him over it.
And David, before you respond, here's what Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid said on Monday about the drama that's playing out in his home state.
Well, it's not over. And we can't have an American people that violate the law and just walk away from it. So it's not over.
David Corn, it's not over. That is an ominous, those are ominous words given what the other side seems to be willing to do in order to keep this going.
You know, Mike Huckabee is pretty conservative, but when he ran for president and when he was governor of Arkansas, he tried to talk about things from sort of, I thought, a sane perspective, a communal perspective, actually. And here he is with the most inflammatory of language, accusing federal law enforcement officials who work for us, who are protecting American government property rights, right? You know, protecting the American taxpayers, of threatening to shoot someone after they've given him 21 years to get on the right side of the law. Reminds me again of that rhetoric we heard back in the 90s, in which some Republicans, or some conservatives, were basically encouraging the militia movements and stoking, as Howard said, their most paranoid fantasies. And when you do that, you know, people out there feel validated, they feel justified, and gosh knows what they're going to do. This is a fight for freedom, and they're willing to die for freedom, and you encourage that, it's going to lead to violence.
Joy, I think David makes a really good point about the migration of Mike Huckabee. The fact is that in the 90s, the people David was talking about really were still pretty much on the fringe of the Republican Party and the conservative movement, really. But now, the rhetoric of resentment and fear and paranoia about the federal government is reaching a fever pitch within the basic mainstream conservative part of the Republican Party. Yeah. And that's very interesting and very dangerous, I think, for the Republicans if they hope to win a presidential election.
That's a good point, because if you look at the Obamacare fight, what it's all about, taking freedom away. We're not a free country anymore, and they're tying that general theme to events like this, and it's going to cause some people to take action into their own hands.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not a way to grow the party when you take the fringe out of the attic and bring it into the living room and actually let it take over the whole house. Thank you very much, David Corn and Howard Fineman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joy.
All right.